Okay, so I am going to do a video that runs through hopefully everything that will help someone if they ever get this issue. So it first started off with, I could see a lot of blow-by of carbon deposits and soot around where the swirl flap actuator arm is that controls the movement of the swirl flaps inside the intake manifold. And there is a little rubber gasket that sits in there that eventually just wears over time, and it allows crap to pass through. Now that was pre-existing, and I think so when I got the car it was pre-existing, and I think it didn't throw a code at that point because the actual gunk had sealed it off a little bit, so it wasn't telling the computer that there was enough of a drop in airflow and a leak to trigger this p115C code. But I have actually cleaned out the intake manifold, being studious as I am, and I think that's what's actually made the code occur. So I'll show you my little fix to solve that leak there. And then I actually encountered another problem, which took me a while to figure out where it was, but actually the movement of me taking the intake manifold off a few times to troubleshoot that initial issue, I had actually destroyed or damaged the, there's a little O-ring gasket that sits where the EGR cooler pipe enters into the block. I tried an initial fix with just a cheap O-ring that I had in the garage, and it wasn't right. It was still boost leaking around there, still throwing the code. And a really good investment is to use a smoke machine and try and obtain enough pressure to mimic what the engine is doing under load, because that was the only way that I found these tiny leaks. And you just notice a slight drop in miles per gallon. When the leak was bad, actually you can hear it as a hissing sound. But yeah, I'll show you all the videos of this, and I'll try and hopefully make it as foolproof for anyone. And it saves you money if you don't have to buy a whole intake manifold. Whee! So here is one of my attempts where I lifted up the intake manifold, and this is where I actually achieved the final fix on the swirl flap actuator. I'm just showing you the swirl flaps. I have done a clean on the intake manifold. I think oven cleaner is supposed to be the best to use. I didn't have that. I used yellow stuff or elbow grease, degreaser, and a pressure washer. But here's the problem. You see where the brass arm enters, you get a leak of a blow-by there, and then I'll show you shortly how I fix that. So here's the issue. You can see that is just so loose now. So let's see what I can do. So that is actually, I put a bit of shrink wrap around it. That's better, but I think I could get it tighter. Try another round. Okay, so what I've done is the shrink wrap, this bit is too tight with it on, it won't slide on, so there's no shrink wrap under there. So I put the plastic wash on first, double shrink wrap, and then placing the rubber gasket on. I think that's pretty snug, and hopefully it won't get sucked into the intake. Let's give that a go. Just finishing the end off with a scalpel blade. That could be the trick. Such a simple... Okay, so when I put everything back together after that last bit, it resolved the swirl flap actuator leak. So I put the smoke machine through and I wasn't getting any smoke leaking through there. So that's a really nice, easy fix. And sometimes people, when they look at their swirl flap rods and they're wiggling them around, you can see quite a lot of play. Now, you've got to remember that that play is probably occurring if you've got that gasket is loose. Now, there are other gaskets that sit along the brass rod. Again, if they were weak, then that could cause potential too much movement. And then people talk about the brass rod disintegrating or swirl flaps disintegrating and then entering the intake manifold. You can get a reinforced version. So there is a company in Poland and also another company in Germany, but the one in Germany can no longer ship to the UK because of the EU shipping charges and stuff. And the Polish website looks a little bit of a risk. so I haven't gone down that route. But they do say that it's like everything with the swirl flaps. I think if you look after them, then they will last. I've inspected them, there's no cracks or anything. Probably at some point I am going to get a new intake manifold. But when I put everything back together, I could hear a hiss coming from, and I'll show you on this video as well, but it's deep down where the EGR cooler pipe enters into the engine block. There's a little rubber gasket O-ring that sits there, and it had been chewed, I think, from the movement of when you have to pull the intake manifold out. You have to use a little bit of, that's the last bit to pop, and it's often quite hard to get off. And I think it's just not quite sat properly. The gasket was a little bit old, and this kind of harder black plastic. I think when they experience high temperatures, these gaskets get a little bit crispy. So, but yeah, it's nice that I found that, and then I will walk you through a whole video of literally start to finish of lifting up the intake manifold, putting the new gasket on and sticking it all back down, because I've done it so many times now. I could probably do it in my sleep, but it might help someone else, because there are videos online and people do different varying steps of how much they take off the engine. This is my kind of cheat way of, there's just a few things you don't need to take off and you can just leverage it nicely. So here we go. Okay, so job of the day is to hopefully try and finally fix that boost leak that I'm getting with this. So I think I found where it was coming from. So you've got the intake manifold here. You've got your EGR valve, EGR cooler, and then right down in there is the EGR cooler pipe, which comes out of the intake manifold. And when I did a leak test, I could see still a tiny bit of smoke coming through there, and the replacement that I put on, as in the O-ring, it's a bit too small. It's not OEM, so hopefully this new one will do the trick, and I might get rid of that p115C code, but you know, wishful thinking. So first thing you do to access this, I thought I'd do a video because I've done this so many times that I could probably do it in my sleep, is disconnect the battery. So it's usually a 10mm socket. Boot. Right, and the reason you do that is because if you accidentally cross around here, you can get a nasty shock. So what I like to do is remove the air intake duct. It just gives you much better access to take this intercooler pipe off. So now I have had the engine running, so it is still warm. It's been off for about half an hour or so, maybe a bit longer than that, but it does help when you're taking off the intake manifold that it is warm. When I first did it, I found that the gaskets were pretty stuck, and it's a bit annoying if you have to try and heat the engine up by reconnecting everything again, so don't do that. Right, this is a really handy thing to take off if you're ever inspecting one of these cars. You just pull that out. Sometimes to get this back in it's easier to pull that off, but it's a great way to have a look down at your crank pulley and things like that, and any coolant leaks. I've seen a few people have leaks here where the water pump is. As I say, on this model we actually replaced all of those major water coolant pipes because they are known to go, and if you lose coolant your engine can overheat, and badness with blown gaskets and things, it's my understanding anyway. So be careful when you pull this off that you don't break the clips, they are quite fragile. And next bit is we're going to use an 8mm socket and take off all of these. In fact, I'm going to use this one. It's probably easier to do it with a electronic drill or something, but I feel that there is more risk of you know, damaging them when you do that, especially when you come to tighten them on these and the clips go. What I like to do is when I take these off is actually put all my bits in these. They're quite handy as a little bucket because it's a good way to check that you've put everything back properly. There's a bolt here, slightly different to the other bolts. Usually it has a bit of bodywork paint on it. That one. Take this off. That's where your electronics box is, and why it's really crucial to make sure your gutters are nice and clean, because if they get blocked, water overflows and enters into your electronics, and there's lots of wires that go in there, and the trouble is they wouldn't be, I don't think they'd be an easy simple one wire fix sort of thing. They're all bundled together, so, and can you imagine trying to reroute all of those? That would be a frickin' nightmare. Right, so that's your pollen filter housing. Put that somewhere down there. Right, put that there for a sec. So you've got, I think this is just the boot open sensor, and you unclip those, and then you've got the air quality sensor here. Undo all of these, and then you can just lift this bit out. It's quite heavy. Okay, next bit is taking off this little, my one's proper knackered, but it's the rear engine sound insulator. I don't particularly like this one because it's so knackered, it's catching. It used to have foam on the, I don't particularly like the foam though as well, they tend to degrade, but yeah, the trouble I have with this is it catches when I put the engine cover on. Anyway, could buy a new one, could not. I mean, how often should you be taking it off? Not that often. Okay, so now we're at this point. I'm going to just undo a few things. Any particular order? Not really. Pull that off. So this boost pipe can always be a bit fun. There is a little clip down here. Oh, you bastard. There we go. Right. And then, so the reason it's nice having this off is you can actually access this clip this way a lot more easily. There we go. That's how I get that one off. Now when you have a look in here, you will always see a little bit of blow-by oil in there. Now another reason why I was pretty convinced I was getting the air leak around here, because once time I looked through this, I've done loads of different things with this intake, and it was looking like chocolate milk, and that's the forbidden milk of basically moisture getting in there, and the moisture probably came from, I think, just air or something. It's probably not anything else, but if you are cleaning in here, you want to remove that, because I accidentally damaged the first one by poking stuff in here, but it just builds up again. It smells toxic. But right, next bits. Probably going to remove, that's a number 13, if I remember quite correctly. So this is the power supply to the alternator. I'll take this off. Lift those off, and then I put this back on. That means I'm not going to lose it. And the reason I'm doing this is it just creates a bit more space. There's some people that do a lot more bits taken off, and it depends if you're pulling the whole intake off. You might want that little bit more space, but I'm not. Okay, as I say, no particular order really. I find I end up needing this off anyway. That, and then it gives it a bit more. I'm going to take that off to help. See how we get on. I have taken that off before. And that one. Actually, I'm going to leave that on. I don't think I'll need that off. It's just you find some of these cables end up catching as you're trying to lift the intake off. That can come off. Now this one can be an absolute nightmare to pull off. I did put a bit of silicone grease on that last time, but it always gets a bit sticky. Oh, he's such a bastard, isn't it? Get on with that, because that basically goes down, so there's a sensor that goes into the intake. It is handy to have that off. Yeah, I did get this off last time, but I feel like I risk damaging it every time I do it. So the problem is they have these little rubber seals to stop water getting in. Great, but they are quite hard to pull off. So, what to do next? Let's get a 10mm socket and get some of these other bits off. So, do this one. That's off, and that should give me a bit more lift. Let's disconnect you. There's a little air sensor or something. Okay, right. Now you've got several bolts on the intake itself, but the other thing I'm going to need to get off is this sway bar. So let's take the little protective cap off. Let's think, which one was it that fitted? Was it any of these? No. Fits on there. Let's use this bad boy. So you don't need to undo it fully, it's just enough so it releases it. I'm going to leave that on there. I know that's the one that fits. Which one is it? This one? No. Some of these I can now remember off by heart, but I have a temptation to start labelling them because I take them off so bloody often. But here's hoping that this might be the last time. Okay. Okay, and then it just slides out. There is a little grommet thing in there, which I guess reduces vibration. And put that there so I don't lose it. I'm going to pop that down here. Okay, so that gives you just a bit more entry point. Okay, so 10mm socket on all of the intake bolts. There's one down here. Yeah, okay. I'll tell you the torque settings for these later. There's a sneaky little one in here. Yeah, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bit of a weird number. The other thing I often do is sometimes find that this can be a bit tight. You see this one that comes over, it has a little clip in here. Here. What I'm going to do is
that one. And there's another one down there, but it's just... So take those two off as well. Okay, I think that's most of that. Sometimes having these a bit free helps me, so it's a fucking pain in the ass to get this back though. How do I do this again? Oh yeah, just push them outwards and up and it all comes out. As you see, electronic box, don't touch any of that. Alright, put that over there. Oh, it's hot. Probably doesn't help I've got cold. Alright, lift these out. Just gives you a bit more space. Now there's also a few clips around the back, and the way they come together is they kind of have a ridge and class like that, so I tend to put a little flathead in and just open them up. It's not going to be really possible for me to show you that. This is my favourite bit. This is the point where I jump inside, because I just find that easier to reach. Put my bits there. What I will also need is that to cover up the intake holes. So try not to step on anything important and sit on the main cross arm and get in there. Okay, right, so let's get some of these clips at the back. Yes. Hopefully I got that shine on there. Right, that's... There we go, there's that one, and that one, and then there's another one here. And a tip when you put them back is put them in a way, an orientation that's easy to view them, not backwards, because it's really hard to put them back on otherwise. Okay, so when you get to the point where you've just loosened all your intake bolts, you want to make sure that they are really loose, because otherwise, and I'll show you with this one, so that's actually still gripping into the intake, so you want to get it to the point where it's completely loose. And sometimes when you're jiggling around your intake, it will re-engage and you'll be stuck. Any form of grip of something still attached will hinder you in removing it. So just get everything really nice and loosey-loosey. This one. This one. As I say, you can take off more bits. But I kind of find the more bits you take off, the harder it is to freaking get them back. Let's see. There we go, that one's all the way out. And this one. That one's all the way out, and then there's one more here, so remember it's 5, and I can start to see the intake moving now, which is good. Probably won't do that if it's the first time you've ever taken it off, because it will be stuck like glue, but here we go, a little bit of jiggly jig, and let's get it out. Now, this one, disconnect this connection to the alternator. That might give me a bit more space. Right, let's have a think. What are we doing here? Where are you going that's causing me a chip? Right there. Perfect. Now I can see inside. Okay. So I don't stick anything into those ports, I'm just going to put that there and remove. Let me see if I can show that a bit better. Maybe, how do I get this off? That's what we're looking at, and that's where this little gasket goes. The fact it came off that easy suggests it wasn't tight enough anyway, or snug enough. Right, I'm going to pop that off and then stick the... Okay, so I didn't film that bit because I wanted to concentrate, so I didn't drop it down the port, and I'll probably do the same in a minute. So let's compare these two. So I knew that this one was a little bit too small, and I suspect as it's stretched it's become too narrow to create the seal, and to help fit everything I put a little bit of plumber's grease, which is just silicone grease, anything like that. And it initially did stop the code for a very brief bit, but then I guess as it passed that, it doesn't work anymore. I'll put that in there so I don't lose that. Pop that there, and then let's pop a bit of this on just to make it easier to fit. Ideally I could take the whole intake out, but it's a faff, so I'm going to go the quick option, which is do it whilst it's still slightly in place, because it is quite hard. You get it out easy enough, well, ish, but then trying to stick it back in, you have to kind of remember how you managed to do that, which is fun. Alright, I'm going to switch the camera off again for this because I want to concentrate. It's very hot sitting on an engine bay. Right, so I popped it in. There it is. I might put a little bit more silicone grease, because what I'd want, and what happened with the old one, is it hadn't slipped in nicely and then it had degraded. I want it to slide right in and just be nice and snug. And what you don't want is where you're, you know, if that isn't fully in and you bolt down your intake, it needs to go in, and it's very hard to see, you know, when you're bolting this all down. You can't really visualize that, but I will check again at the end. So let's try that. Right. Okay, so a little bit more silicone grease, and I feel like this is the sort of thing that if it burns off, it's not catastrophic damage to anything. You know, it's fairly inert stuff, so that's nice and squidgy. I've taken that out. You don't want to leave that in. Interestingly, my ports look, my intake valves look as dirty as before I clean them, so that shit just builds up anyway. Right, and then I've got to try and get this back in to place. This is going to be a fiddle. Whew, it's a bit hard work. So I think, now I haven't tightened anything yet, but I was just having a little look at where everything is. A little pipe in there. Make sure everything's kind of clear, and then now when you start tightening, you're only going to get them to sort of finger tight, and then you need to use a torque wrench in a certain sequence across with your initial torque in a cross pattern, and then the final torque. You see how this is now just kind of moving into place, and that is just a very gentle bit of torque. And same thing, principle I'm going to use is going, as you can see, I'm going in a kind of star pattern, same as tuning drums and things. You want to create an even tension across everywhere. So that's just about tight on there. I might do this one next. Oh, isn't it exciting? It could fix it. She tells herself. I'm really sick of this code. But ever the optimist. You can only but try. So let's do this one. She might do that one next. So hot. Yeah, I can see it's slowly moving into place, and probably what's happening is that little rubber gasket is now getting squished in to place the O-ring on that intercooler, which is good. So what I'm going to do whilst I'm in this position is, just because it's easier, I'm going to clip these back into place, and I'm going to have the mouths opening forward to me. That makes it a lot easier to put them back. Mouth opening forward to me. Put that one back. Oh, this is an awkward position on the back. Nearly done. Okay, right, let's go get a torque wrench and finish up those torques. Okay, so nice little Norbar torque wrench. So if I remember correctly, the finishing torque is 16 Newton meters. There's a slight variation in that, but that's not actually a huge amount. But you start on, I think it's 10 or 11, something like that, to do the initial tightening. So let's do that. Right, let's start. Let's do 11. Okay, connect that here. Remember, you've got 5 bolts. So, 1, and do your cross pattern on this as well, so that the idea is you're creating a nice even tension. Okay, well this one had a bit of a way to go. Right. There's one in here. Right, and then let's go up to 16. Let's go down. There. It's quite hard to film and do this at the same time, so you'll have to excuse the shady filming. Okay, 16. Let's start back on this one. There we go. Alright, so that should all be at 16 Newton meters. Always remember to take the tension off your torque wrench spring. So let's bring that back down to nothing, because otherwise it stretches over time, and that is not good. So the next thing now is going to be putting it all together, and then I'm going to run a leak test, but let's just have a little peek whilst I'm at this point. So yeah, let's see if I can show you. So the area that we're interested in is in here, and that's where the pipe is. I think that looks okay. I can't see the gasket, it's in the right place. It's the best I can hope for right now. The moment of truth will be when I run the smoke test or run the car and see what happens to that code. So, okay, so let's reverse pretty much everything that we've done. No particular order. I mean, there probably is an order to it, but I'm doing it this way. Okay. That guy sits over here. I wonder if I can get a better view of this whilst I'm doing this. You connect into there. These guys, so they go over the top. This one will be a bit tricky to clip back in. There you go, in there. You go in there. So if you ever get confused between these two wires, look at how many wires are going into it. The one with one wire goes to the single sensor down the bottom, down here, and then the one with two goes to the big boost bad boy intercooler pipe, the elephant trunk I call it. Right, that goes to that, goes to there, and then let's get a 13mm to screw that on. You don't want that coming loose. 13mm. I don't do a particular torque on it. I don't think it's something that it could be damaged by particularly over torquing. I just want it enough that it's not going to wobble around. Right, so that goes down there. This clips on here. You're all in place. That kind of tucks under there somehow. Right, let's stick that screw back in. Sweating like a POG. Put you in. Careful with these that you don't do them too tight and round them off at sad times. Right, 10mm hex for these two. Where's me 10? 10 is on this, isn't it? Right, let's pop this back on. Put you in there. Again, these don't need to be particularly tight, just enough. It's just to hold that all in place. Going into anything, you're not. Yeah, did that before. Right, we're in. Okay, that's that. Try and put this back. I always find this a bit difficult. I think some of my clips are broken. Put it into open position. Make sure that's all cushy. Which way around? That way. Let's see if we can get. There is method to this. Okay, first off, inspect your pipe. Give it a little check that your seals are in the right position, and they do go in a very specific way. Oh, it smells like a tank. Okay, so you've got to be careful that you don't move this off when you put it in. I tend to put this end in first, and it's good to have the clips open on that side, from the bottom side. Oh, yes. Okay, so that's in an open position. Now, be careful with these pipes, they're worth incredible amounts of money for what they are. Like 800 quid for a new one, something ridiculous. So, let's get okay, so it's in at the top as well now, and then I push that all the way in, engage the clip, and just pull backwards on it, make sure that's fully in, and then push up this end, and we're in. Right, and now, because I did have one time I didn't do that properly, and it came off, and you get an instant lack of power, and you can hear the wind blowing. Right. So that's all on. Now would probably be, I suppose I put the sway bar back on. Come on, let's be wishful thinking that I don't need to go back in. Yeah. But once I've got this in, what I'll probably do is run a quick smoke test, leak test, just for my own. Yeah, we're in. Right. That's that. These need to be pretty tight, because otherwise they undo. That's pretty good. Right, okay. Okay, so I've got a smoke test going. I can never get it perfectly sealed around there. The good trick when you're doing this as well, so I've got it going in through here. You see that? It's got a little PTFE on it, and it works quite nicely to build up a bit of pressure there. The other thing I just found when I was doing it is that there was a build-up of non-smoky air. You have to kind of let it out in order for the smoke to fill the system. But it says to me that there is hopefully good. And I was having a look in my problem area. I can't see anything there. Another good area to check is these connections, and down there your intercooler radiator. I've already done that extensively. I took the whole thing, the front of the bumper off to have a look at that at another point. There were no holes. You can do it with soapy water as well. Another thing that can cause leaks is your breather valve. So I actually can't see anything at the moment, so the truth is going to be in when the engine is running, because no matter what I do I can never get this as a completely tight seal. I'm sure I could buy you know, a thing that sits in there a bit better, but this is a bit DIY. So I'm going to put everything back now, and I'm going to start the car, take it for a test drive, and say a Hail Mary. Woo! But yeah, for completeness, I might as well show you how everything goes back. So another thing that people talk about with this code, so I should have said at the beginning, basically the p115C code is that the mass airflow sensor is detecting a different amount of airflow, and actually it's a lower amount. So it means that it detects what's coming in from the outside and what's, you know, the pressure this way. So it can sometimes be a problem with the mass airflow sensor, but usually that triggers another code, because I put a second-hand one on. I thought I'd bought a new one, someone was being dodgy, and then it threw a very specific mass airflow code. So anyway, there wasn't that, and then I decided just to get a brand new Bosch one. And don't go direct to BMW, because they're Bosch that they use, and they are £400 to get direct from them. I think I paid about 120 or something for that. And it has, when you get the box, it's worth noting, it has little holographic seals over the box, so that you know it's genuine and hasn't been opened and used. So another good thing to check is that there isn't any blockages in your actual airbox. This filter, to me, I don't think that's the problem. I think it's very clean, really. It will get changed in about 2,000 miles with the next service. Put that all on. I need to do. So another thing it can be is you can have a leak around here. You can have problems with your EGR valve. So this often breaks. You just get a new one for 15 quid. EGR valve can get stuck. There's an arm that sits in here that wears, and it can then create a groove, which means that the arm doesn't do this movement nice and smooth. It just kind of gets stuck. So I actually replaced that with a Delphi one. I probably in hindsight would have gone for an OEM one. Just when I put the OEM one side by side, the old one, I just wasn't too happy. That's the wrong way up. With the quality, it wasn't terrible. You know, like some of them look really crap. I think it's probably the best out of the non-OEM ones, but I would have preferred. It just looks a bit more solid, the BMW one. Other things are, I guess EGR cooler could be an issue, but when I've looked inside the intake manifold of this car, it really wasn't that dirty. You know, like some of them, you look at them, are really manky. So I don't think it's that, and I think that throws a very specific code as well. I think there's a sensor that it can detect when that's blocked. Another thing that I've seen people talk about in the Mini forums, because the Mini uses the N47 engine as well, is the throttle. If that's the shutter valve, it's actually called, something to do with when the engine shuts off, it kind of stops it shuttering, because it something with the airflow, maybe like is it runaway you can get on diesel engines, so you need to cut the oxygen, the airflow off. But if this is sticky or dirty, it can cause a problem. I took it off, cleaned it, didn't change it. I've actually replaced it with a second-hand one that's nice and cleaned up by me. Didn't do anything. So anyway, I've now got another throttle body there. And sometimes you can get leaks from the gaskets in this pipe, the intercooler pipe. I've replaced those with OEM ones. Pretty happy. That's not the issue, but you do have to be careful with how you're putting it back on, how I'm showing you. As I say, I have made mistakes where it's not been on properly, and that will throw the code because it's creating a little boost leak. You've got other things like you know, these little sensors. This one I'm just putting back on, if that's got a leak, or this one here can get cracked. That's really shit if that happens, because you have to replace that whole pipe. I know that George Auster's guy did that. What else can cause it? But yeah, anything to do with leaking in the manifold, if you've got a crack in your intake, which I was really hoping I didn't have. I did have a leak here in the swirl flap actuator arm, and I did a little fix on the arm that goes in. There's a rubber gasket that sits around it, so I put some shrink wrap just on that end I think I did 2 layers, and that was enough just to widen it a bit so that rubber gasket is now tight. You cannot buy those gaskets. You have to buy a whole intake manifold, which from BMW is £850 including VAT. And I wouldn't trust the non-OEM ones because swirl flap death is catastrophic if they break into the engine. So actually that has stopped that leak. But yeah, I'm hoping my problem is that I destroyed the O-ring gasket and keep pulling that off. So next bit to put on is, okay, I'm going to put it all back together. I'm going to be confident in what I have done. So that goes around this way. So remember to connect this properly that you get the kind of click, and otherwise it will throw a code. It may not throw a full-on code that you would get on the dash or anything, but if you go into the deeper settings, I did find that I hadn't put that back once and it was showing a little code. And then this is your boot, your bonnet thing. It always does that when you reconnect that. And then you've got these little grommets that you put back-ish. Grommet things. Because it helps with rubbing noises. Remember your 8mm socket to put these all back. So get that out. And you've got the slightly different bolts for this. Slightly different. On. Let's go the wrong way. If you ever want to clean your air con, a nice cheap trick way to do it is spray a load of the air con cleaner in here. That's the fan that sucks in air. But if you really want to get to the condenser, you have to go through the glove box kind of route and aiming the tube up towards the center console in the middle of the dash. I did do it and it made it smell much nicer. You don't get that kind of musty odour afterwards, so it does make a difference, but it is faffy to get to. Okay, right, next one, let's put this on. Oh, bollocks. I haven't put that back on, have I? Always something I forget. I wonder if I can do this without. I hate this little piece of crap. I might be able to do it. It's fiddly. It's a pain in the ass. Okay, and then when you're putting this back on, I've put that little cover back on, I didn't show that bit, but when you put this on, just make sure you've got it all lined up, because if you put any, let me show this. So you accidentally put too much pressure on one of them, you will snap them very easily. That should be all in. That looks good. And then I'm going to put my engine cover back on. And you've got to make sure when you put this in that you have. I've lost myself. Make these are going into the little grommets, and if you want to reduce vibration from your engine cover, buy a new set of grommets. It really helps. You just slide them in, because they do wear. I hate the fact that it catches on there. Let's have a look. That's on. Nope. One is. really stops that vibration nicely. Okay, put that back on. Oh man. Put these back in. They helpfully have little left and right markers. Goes that way. And then you've got little grommety things. I find that one never really goes on properly, but anyway, are you back in there? Ah, right, I better put these screws back before I use that one back in its place. Right. On little tail. Put all these bolts back in. Just going to place them first. Don't go too tight in that, that's literally as far as you need on that one. They tend to be the ones that break. I've got reinforced ones that are 3D printed, but I just don't fancy breaking it. That's that side. 3 more. Have reconnected the power supply when I was using the smoke machine in the boot. Obviously I did that after I reconnected the alternator. I don't fancy a nice little shock back to life. In here is your ABS module and an extra brake fluid. Again, just enough tightness on that, and then last bit is going to be putting that back in. So if you have trouble with this, you can always take this bit out, but it should be right. Squish it in there. Squishy. Put these in. But yeah, if you're buying one of these cars, take that off and have a little look. You can see quite a lot of problems once that's out of the way. I mean, you don't have to, but I suppose if you're at risk of damaging something, but definitely take the blooming engine cover off anyway. Certainly should have a look at something before you buy it. Ugh. I put myself into the screw. Yeah, if anyone's watching this and they don't know this engine, you've got that is the power steering fluid, hydraulic fluid. This is your coolant reservoir. Do not open that if the engine is hot. It will blow up in your face. If you ever want to do the aircon, the low power side is up in there. Right. Let's put this back on. Grommety thing. This side always goes on a bit better than the other one. Anyway, right, so I'm just going to have a think to myself, is there anything that I haven't done? Looks like everything's fine. Moment of truth. Going to fire up, but everything looks in place. I haven't left anything anywhere. So it's time. What happens? tell me I need to reset the clock. Okay, well, sounds okay. Let's take it for a test drive.
So I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but I did notice it at the time when I first started there, and the first rev, it sounded like a little bit rough, almost like a little tinny. Whether that was just something blowing through, I don't know, a bit of the silicon, who knows, but it didn't do it again. And I've driven her for about 200 miles now. I've not had any pending codes or anything like that. Sometimes when it's cold, there is the slight tiny little blip in the throttle within the first minute. But I think that could just always have been there. It's an older car. It's not anything that's concerning me. So hopefully that could be the fix. And the thing I would say is that yes, it has taken me several months to troubleshoot that and hopefully come to the solution, but it's definitely cost me less monetary, yeah, for sure, because I think if you took the car to BMW, what they do is probably just replace those parts outright. And yes, that would inevitably fix things because they're replacing gaskets in the process, but that's a huge amount of cost. As I say, just the intake itself costs £850, and then you would have labour for doing that. You know, for them it's at least an hour or two's work. So, and then even if that didn't fix it, you've got everything else. It's very pricey. So if you have perseverance, you've got some good tools. Halford's toolkit's great. The Ansel smoke machine is the one I use, ANCEL. I think you can get them from AliExpress as well, or just Amazon. But yeah, so the other thing I was going to say, if any of you have the BMW E84 X1 model, then head over to the Facebook group Modified E84 BMW. You'll find it on there, and generally I find it, you get on that group in particular just very, very enthusiastic people who are interested in looking after this particular model of BMW that seems to get forgotten a bit because it doesn't have quite the same appeal as maybe the more sporty coupes and things like that. But yeah, head on over, join. They've got thousands and thousands of members now, so we're going to keep these old cars alive. I'm shortly reaching, so I've just hit the 148,000 miles, so let's see how far we can go with her.